kind words. And of course, I'm here in Limerick to learn from you all. I like to spend a little time with a department where there are several people that I can learn from in different ways. My areas of research are a little bit different. Yesterday I talked about one interest I had in learning theory, and the question is, what do they actually learn in PE? That's the main question I'm trying to work on there. The other interest is I'm going to talk about today, it's about health and the relationship to physical education in different ways. And of course I'm going to talk about health not in general, but in relation to physical education. Because why is it that we always talk about diseases in plural and health in singular? Aren't there healths? Why aren't there many different healths? And what I'm going to do today, hopefully, is a little bit trouble your idea of what health can be in physical education in different ways. I hope I can do that, at least. So, I'll spend a lot of time trying to answer that question. And I'm not there yet. So what is health? Because I think that the answer to this question in different contexts is important how we organize different activities. For example, physical education. And of course the answer to that question would be different, for me at least, in physical education, or if I went into the emergency room in hospital. And it should be. The problem is that it isn't always like that. Sometimes we use the same concept of health or rely. So I'm all interested in the assumptions around health in different ways. And in that way, I'm interested in health theory and health philosophy in different ways. Imagine that, because we all know what health is, but still we can't describe it. So imagine if somebody from outer space came to Earth. E.T. comes back. E.T. was here in 83, and she, or he, I don't know actually, I don't remember, say she. If she came back now and wanted to explore something that people, at least in the Western world, are occupied with, and that is health, I think E.T. would be rather confused. Because what is health? Well, it could be it's Swedish gymnastics up there. Actually, my grandmother is on that picture. It could be measuring your belly. It could be doing sports. It could be a medical doctor. It could be maybe playing the ukulele. Or it could be something like that, sculpt your sexy curves. And in that journal, you can also read about makeup. You can read about fitness. You can read about shopping. You can read about renovating your kitchen. Interesting enough. I mean, health education in school, is that about learning how to renovate your kitchen? Or you can win a tropical spa holiday. So it's many different things. I think E.T. would be rather confused coming to Earth now and understanding that. But let's try to help E.T. now. So ask the experts. And surprisingly, that's you. So what I want you to do is, on a piece of paper, write health is. And then you turn to 3, like a beehive, 3 or 4, and answer the question. If E.T. was standing there and you say, well, I know what it is. Health is. And you just finish the sentence, please. Super. 3-4 minutes for that. Have a chat with the one closest to you.
We're staying here. It's having my own partner work in 7
Yes. I'm not going to give you the answer. Because we know it's active.
Well, yeah, they don't see the making one so
We're not playing with them. I know, we're playing with them.
Peer pressure.
Did you hear what you just said?
yeah.
You're moving away, I said.
We were getting answers so
So, what'd you put?
Well, I came on Jeff, she said happy. Then we kind of said, balances. You started going off on something before you interrupted.
I said, what I said was I said happiness. It's a connection between mind and body. Okay, so I put, well, similar, it's functional, social, emotional well-being. And I think that, I mean, it gets, that's good, I remember the word well-being, and you always talk about it. No, but I like it, I like yours.
But I find out the way that it's a balances, whether it's mind, body, or whether it's a combination of things, so it's not really too much of one thing.
Very nice, though.
I'll give you 30 more seconds to finish your sentence.
Use Google. She's busy now, she can't talk. I think she pretty much all has the same kind of thing, but it's just kind of version of
read the YouTube one. Sorry, things that's really interesting. Yeah.
That's help, that should help.
All right, let's see what you got. Michelle?
I said health is happiness.
Health is happiness.
Yes.
That sounds like you, Michelle.
That is
Then we started
interesting.
talking around what is happiness and
Yeah.
into lots of
Yeah.
different topics.
Do you think E.T. would be less confused?
Probably more.
Yeah. And in this, what did you write? Any of
I actually, I've lost a piece of, she lost a piece of paper.
Yes.
I said balanced connection between mind and body.
balance, a very common way to describe health in different ways in different cultures? Yes?
I had it, which says it got very much functional, social, emotional well-being.
You read the World Health Organization.
No, but I'm glad they
Yeah.
had the same thoughts.
That's really good. And up front here, what did you write?
Well, we didn't talk to each other about that.
Okay.
I said, health is living well.
Health is living well.
Maybe with a comma, living well.
Yeah.
Living well.
Did you?
Yeah, health is a process of harmonious functioning within and engagement with the world.
Yes. Process is another common way to describe health in different ways. And Brendan, did you have it?
Yeah. Health is the capacity to function physically, emotionally, socially, and cognitively in daily life. Effectively
Yeah.
in daily life.
Yeah.
So to the WHO.
Yeah.
Good job, Brendan. Good job.
Ticks all the boxes.
Yeah. All the aspects. Yeah. So health In Swedish, the word for health, hälsa, means whole. Yeah, but we have to try your definitions, of course. You have to try them out. So I want you to answer the next question. If you look at your definitions, and answer that question with your definition. Is alcohol good for people's health? I give you 2 minutes for that. You can, same groups, and you can check your definitions against each other.
In moderation.
Hell yes.
Everything you
A little bit of everything is fine.
It's obviously not.
That's back to your
Be careful.
I can't say
So that's where all this like new sickness that comes out, like literally going exercising too much. There is a name to actually.
but it's like, well, I just finished exercising, so I need to do more, so I'm addicted. So I mean, in moderation, anything is pretty good.
You're stealing that word.
No, but we're just talking like, because it is bad as CrossFit.
Okay, is alcohol good for people's health? According to your definitions, who says yes to this one?
Qualified, yes.
And then, of course, one of the major objectives of school health education would be to teach children how to drink alcohol. Because it's good for people's health, isn't it? Who says no? Who says it depends?
Well, yeah.
You didn't know that you had that as an option, of course. But of course, we have a lot of people saying it depends. And the question is then, of course, on what? So those of you who said it depends, what does it depend upon? Anybody?
Genetics,
Attitudes, genetics, anything else?
Impact.
Relationships, impact, amount.
How much exercise you actually are.
Got an exercise into this?
I like it for
Of course.
overall
Yeah.
exercise and health is good. Why can't you enjoy having a practice?
My answer would be,
Huh?
Kind of trailed off.
it depends.
Sorry.
Oh, well then that's the right answer.
Yes!
Exactly.
But it's yes and a no, and it's all of those. But you need to, if we say it depends, we need to answer the question, it depends on what. And we started to unpack some things. But because of course, kind of different dimension. On an individual level, I mean, me having a beer last night, I would say, yeah, it was quite good for my social, psychological well-being and my happiness and everything around that. Yeah, it was good for my health. But a close colleague who is an alcoholic, same beer, nah, wouldn't think so. On a societal level, the answer is definitely no, it's not good for people's health. If you look what alcohol does in deaths in traffic, violence in the home, violence in the cities and so forth, I would say no, alcohol is not good for people's health. If you look at that level. Locally, in a small sports club, going out for a beer maybe, yeah, it's good for their well-being, could be. Globally, when we know what the commercial of alcohol companies trying to sell beers to new countries, sometimes called third world countries, more commercial to sell more beer. Now it's not so good for people's health if you look at globally. physiologically, at least in Sweden, you have, probably here too, we have those evening newspapers, not so keen on scientific results, but they always have this, like, science shows that 1 glass of red wine every day is good for people's health. And those studies very often come from France. Have you seen that? I would be a little bit suspicious already there. But of course, then his health is not about happiness or the whole thing. It's about that 1 glass of red wine will reduce the risk of this kind of cardiovascular disease over a period of 30 years. So it's not about the whole well-being and the big stuff. It's about a very small part of health they're talking about. Socially, yes, of course, happiness, well-being, but we also met people that socially are questionable under the influence of alcohol, that isn't contributing to the wellness of the group. Psychological aspects, of course, could be positive effects, but negative effects. And moral aspects of drinking alcohol in different contexts, if it's morally something you should do or should not do. At least in Sweden, if you're a member of a sport club like soccer, football, then you have to be pregnant or driving the car if you're not drinking alcohol. Otherwise, you should drink alcohol. But in other contexts, of course, it's morally a different thing. You can look at different contexts, cultural, social, or religious contexts, of course, in relation to how we look at alcohol. But let's try your definition on one more question. You get 1 minute for this one. Is sport good for people's health? Look at your definitions and answer that question.
Participating in it?
I need the best for
What sport are we talking about?
Well, same thing, it depends.
It depends, yeah.
If someone has really, really motivation to play a game.
What you're using it for. If you're trying to be active and you like that competition and whatever that is, great. If you get enjoyment because it's Saturday or Sunday game and you're looking forward to that, you're going to get some friends and we'll relax and have a pub.
But also just people that like play once a week, play soccer once a week, and they're not on.
So they're in the middle, they're not just maybe watching and enjoying it, but they're also participating in the competition stage. If you like betting on it.
Even if you look at professional rugby, it's very
Ask them that question in 10 years' time or 5 years' time.
Another aspect, yeah, because I'm sure rugby here in the States, the concussions, whether or not football should be played with young kids.
Say they're talking about concussions big here as well.
Now, looking back at my own experience, I pinpoint things that I've had 3 or 4 major concussions throughout my playing days. I think that might be something.
So, okay, now E.T. comes up to you and asks, is sport good for people's health? Anybody saying yes or no? No? Depends.
We're learning.
Okay, first. Yeah, I know. You're quick in Ireland. Again, what does it depend upon? Anybody?
What you're using it for, I guess.
What you're using it for?
The culture.
Culture?
What sport?
What sport? Yeah, exactly.
Expectation.
Expectations.
The coaches.
Yeah, definitely.
How much you participate in it? How much you participate in it?
Yes.
The
If you
sporting environment.
participate at all, if you're just a spectator.
Yep.
The sporting environment, just the whole.
Yes, definitely.
situation.
And of course, we've been there, but we can go back to this. Can you use the same ones here? These are only examples. I mean, on an individual level, if we societal level, I would say, yeah, public health-wise, more people in sport, that's good for the public health of the population. Yes, it's good for people's health in that perspective. On an individual level, it's not. For some people, yes. For others, no, not necessarily. And only even if, well, I deliberately use the word sport, could have shifted that to physical activity, it would have been a little bit other thing, because then it depends on other things. But of course, single parent, 3 children, working all day, picking kids from school, getting them fed, cleaning the house, and then I'm going out to do fitness training for 45 minutes. Don't think so. I mean, the stress about that you have to be physically active or do some sport for your health is probably worse for you than the benefit you get from doing the physical activity. From a physiological perspective, yeah, except in terms of the extremes on extreme overweight or anorexia and injuries in sport like that, yeah, there are a lot of physiological benefits of sport in terms of physical activity. Socially, yes, for some people socially, we say often that sport is good for people socially. If I put my 15-year-old daughter in a football team, she would die rather than doing that with other people. She hates that. So for her, socially, it's not good for health to be involved in that. And again, psychological factors, research has shown a lot of psychological benefits, but again, if you hate it, you don't want to be there and everything, not that many psychological well-being in that. And morally and everything could be in the same way, but in a different way, of course, in relation to alcohol. But we need to be aware of it always depends. We cannot start with the assumption that sport is always good for people's health, or that physical activity is always good, or that alcohol is always good or bad. I wouldn't even go so far as say that smoking is bad for people's health necessarily. It depends. At least in Sweden 30 years ago, when nurses were allowed to take a 15-minute break in the morning to go into the smoking room and talking about that idiot of husband they had and the idiot of a doctor and the idiot patients in the ward, and they could relax, get away. So for their social well-being, I think it was quite good that he could go away to these rooms. Now they have to stand 100 meters from the hospital in 50 degrees below zero to do their smoking by themselves. Of course, smoking is not good for their health in one perspective, but in terms of their social well-being, I think that kind of idea, because eating fruit, you weren't allowed to go to a room to eat fruit with your colleagues. Interestingly enough. But we can look at everything, and for me, it always depends, and the context is always important. And again, so I would say it depends on health perspective now. What perspective of health do we start with if something is good or bad for your health? So I'm going to try to unpack this a little bit philosophically now. So this is a definition from a medical dictionary. It's a couple of years old, it's from Sweden, I translated it. But it says something about how health can be defined. Health being the normal condition of the body when it and its organs functions in the best way without any signs of deviation. Well, if we're going to do physical education in relation to health, that would be a quite particular kind of physical education we're talking about then. How do we avoid kids' bodies to show signs of deviation? How do we avoid the risk of that? Another idea of health explained by Mark Twain, he was a little bit out there, I know that, but he said that the only way to keep your health is to eat what you don't want, drink what you don't like, and do what you'd rather not. And I think that a lot of people are affected by that idea of health. Oh, carrots again. Where is the steak and the sauce béarnaise? Or, do I have to run? This is so boring. Why can't I sit indoors and just have a good time? So I think that affects us rather a lot in terms of what health can be. Or the Finnish famous philosopher Georg Henrik von Wright said that health is a condition to flourish. And of course, that would be another PE we're talking about in relation to health, if it's about getting kids to flourish instead of avoiding the risk of normality, of not being normal. It's completely different PEs we're talking about here in relation to health. And of course, we were talking about the World Health Organization definition before, that health is a condition of social, physiological, psychological, spiritual well-being. They also have that's from 1948. They talk about it in the Ottawa Charter of Health Promotion too, where they say that health is created and lived by people within the setting of their everyday life, where they learn, work, play and love. And of course, health is then something that is, we were into that in the definition, something that is lived. It is not something you have or not have, but it's lived by people in their everyday lives. And of course, if health is lived rather than that you have it or can avoid not being something, then it's something else. And again, depending on context. That is not a good definition in the emergency room in the hospital. If I come in with a broken leg, I don't want them to talk about that. I want them to mend my leg. But again, their position of health isn't always good in health education. Philosophically, I would argue that we can talk about two different ideas. One being the pathogenic perspectives. Pathos meaning disease and genic meaning the origins of. So definitions of health that start in the idea that we're searching for the origins of disease. And the first definition about deviation is that kind of definition of health. The interesting with this, I think, is that health is always regarded as human beings' normal condition. This is normality. And of course, if that is normality, then all we have to be concerned about is this. This is what we're going to do research about. This is what we're going to cure or prevent. And health education being about preventing disease or looking for risks for disease. And the interesting, of course, then is how do we get people there to be normal again? The human body's normal condition without showing any signs of deviation, as the first definition was. And this is also interesting, what separates that, because often it has been medical science that separates those two, in terms of you have a diagnosis of some kind. But it can also be the other things. I mean, diagnosis has changed also. Look at burnout syndrome, for example. If you came in with burnout syndrome 30 years ago, they said, take an aspirin, go home and get your act together. Now we have defined burnout syndrome, and it's a disease, so we know what it is. Or oversensitivity to electricity in houses. Again, 30 years ago, it wasn't defined, so you were actually healthy. But now we defined it, so now you have a disease. But that deviation, that idea of normality, doesn't have to be disease. It could be normal and not normal in a more moral sense. In many countries, and in Sweden, homosexuality was regarded as a disease up until the 70s. That is a moral deviation. I read a Swedish medical dictionary from 1902. There, everything related to the specific feminine or female body was a disease. Because, of course, normal, that is a man, 25 years, 75 kilos, preferably white. So everything deviating from that. So menstruating and pregnancy were written in the dictionary as diseases. Because very few male 25 kilos, you know. And that is, of course, is a moral deviation from normality. It could be a political, I mean, Soviet Union in the 70s, wrong political opinion, you're put in a psychological, the mental hospital. So it's different moral norms that can be, it's not only medical norms, in different ways. And these ideas of health, pathogenic ones, has affected us very much over the years, and still does. And to summarize, pathogenic perspective, it is always the disease or the deficit that is in focus. And then, as a consequence, health is regarded as a condition in absence of something, disease, or immorally incorrect behavior. It's often the biological in medicine, but it could be, I mean, psychoanalysis works within this framework. And of course, health becomes the end goal. If you take away all risks and deviations, then you have health. That's where you want to be. And you have to avoid different things. That's why we often talk about physical inactivity rather than physical activity. Because it's physical inactivity that we have to avoid. And today, of course, we are affected by the medical norms around pathogenic perspectives, the inner body, and the functionality of the biological body, and you can count everything, the calculable human being, and now with all the apps and things that are going to check. And of course, some of the measurements created are still measurements that are used in hospitals today, are measurements for taking from the start the population of men. And it's used on children and women, and yeah. I think it's because the only group of people that are stupid enough to actually go on with these kind of experiments are people in the army, men, 25 years, 20 to 25. So then they have like blood pressure and other things. And now we have, of course, the body mass index idea, which is an idea from the start. Body mass index comes, of course, from measuring large objects in space, because it's a relation between weight and height in different ways, and now it's used on human beings like that. And it's a normality, different in different countries, but usually between 18.5 and 25. It's the normal condition of human beings. It's a pathogenic idea of health. And then it's underweight, overweight. But of course, under and over isn't under and over in relation to health in any way. It's under and over in relation to a population. It's a bell-shaped curve in statistics. It's a normal population at some point in time that ended up with the normality being between 18.5 and 25. It could be used on a population level, but we use it happily now on an individual level. I would say that I watched the rugby game the other night, and I would say most of those rugby players are obese or morbidly obese in relation to that scale. And I would say, no, they're not. A Swedish comedian said that I'm trying to change my BMI for years now, and I'm not getting any taller. I'm trying my best. And of course, there are moral norms that affect us all the time, that are pathogenic, which is the outer body, that a slim body is the healthy body, an overweight body is an unhealthy body. And that looks becomes a symbol of health. I mean, if it's about happiness, do we know who is healthy? No, we don't. So that is more easy, but she looks more happy. But, and again, depending on your health perspective, there are, because the idea of obesity is a combination between medical and moral norms at the same time. But they are mostly pathogenic. I'm not saying that obesity is not a health problem. I'm saying it depends. And I'm trying myself constantly if I, in the summer, walk down the street in Sweden, and now I'm going to point out 10 healthy people and 10 not so healthy people. That norm affects me a lot. Like, larger people more often being pointed out by me as the unhealthy ones, and the more young, slim people as the healthy ones. But how do I know that? That, and of course, posture. People walking like this can't be healthy. So posture is another idea of normality. Normal posture is another thing that fits into this. Another way to think about health is salutogenic perspectives. I know that is a difficult word, but Aaron Antonovsky, who coined the phrase in 1979, another way, he took pathogenic, and another way to talk about it is salutogenic. Genic, of course, being origins again, and salos, coming from Greek, means well-being. So, perspectives of health that, instead of looking for the origins of disease, are looking for origins of well-being. Where does well-being come from? He was actually doing research on women in menopause. And he was doing research in Israel in the 60s, and he was interviewing them. And many of these women in his study has been in concentration camps during the World War II. And he said that, well, half of my group were unhealthy. I understand that. That's not a problem to understanding, being from 20 years earlier in concentration camp. But half of his group were actually really healthy. And he said, that's the real question we need to ask. How do we unravel the mystery of health? It's about asking those people that, despite what happened to them, lives healthy lives. And then he said, then we cannot talk about it in a pathogenic way. Or only in a pathogenic way. So he tried to conceptualize that in this way, instead of either or. Health is something, everybody has health. It's not something you have or not have, but everybody has it on a continuum from ease to dis-ease. It's important, there's no disease in that, and it's dis-ease. And then of course, you could be here, 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 here. And of course, diseases will affect people's health. It will affect where you are. But it depends. Not necessarily. Society will affect. Physical activity will. Democracy will. I mean, many things can affect your health in different ways and put you in either side of this continuum, up and back and forth. And the consequence is, of course, that everybody can develop their health. It's not only those that are not normal that can develop towards health, but everybody can always develop their health. You don't have to be here. It's not necessary. You can live a fantastic life just by being in the middle. It's fine. He talked about, in one of his books, a metaphor of the river here. It's about, you can't take people out of the river. We're always in the river of life. So it's about the relation between the swimmer and the river. So if you're an Olympic swimmer, you can be in a really hard current. If you put another person there, they would go on to the dis-ease end. And he said that sometimes it's better to change the river than the swimmer. So putting people in a calm part of the river, or helping them to swim to the calmer part, would be another way to work with health. Then they will keep their position in the river life. So use that metaphor to talk about health in different ways. So when we work with health in a promotive way, we have to look at both the river and the swimmer in different ways. And many things will change this. It could be seeing meaningfulness in life. It could be religion. It could be physical activity in different ways. So, from a salutogenic perspective, it's often a focus on the promotion of health, without disregarding the pathogenic questions of disease or risk or anything. Because diseases and risks and everything will affect people's health. I'm not saying in any way that obesity is not affecting people's health. Everything from the stigma of it to that you can't do the things you want to do in life is important. But it doesn't affect everybody's life. Health is always multidimensional. You have to look at, and we have agreed upon that, because I would say that most of your definitions we started with are variations of salutogenic perspective and not pathogenic ones. And it's in a dynamic. We talked about it as a process. It's a process of becoming. Health is something that it becomes all the time. It's something new. You have to create it. It's a process. It's not, oh, now I have it. Now I can stand here and wait. And you can have disease and still be healthy. It's important. And of course, it's not regarded as the end goal. And to also talk about when you have a decent enough health on the continuum, then you can do things you want to do in life. So you have to develop your health in order to do the things you want to do in life. Another Swedish health philosopher said that if you want to know anything about a person's health, you need to ask her what she wishes for in life. Then you know what kind of things you need to help them with. And from a salutogenic perspective, we can ask different questions. I think that is what I took mostly from Antonovsky's work, that you ask different questions. You're not only asking questions about how can we prevent this disease, but we're also asking questions about other things. And that is the most important thing. So, the goal of PE, for an example, if you have a pathogenic perspective of health, and only a narrow pathogenic, then you ask your questions like, and it's a valid question, how do we use physical activity in order to prevent overweight, future diseases, and premature death, and thus the health of the population? That's a totally valid question from a pathogenic perspective. From a salutogenic perspective, I would say, we should ask that question. That is an important question. But we should also ask the question, if we want to unravel the mystery of health and physical education, how do we use physical activity in order to strengthen people's resources? In different ways. And then, of course, it could be then we focus on activity rather than inactivity, and we focus on fitness rather than a lack of fitness. It could be anything from motor development. Motor development, I think, is a really important resource for young people's health. That is important for them to do things they want to do in life. But it could be movement in general, learning about movement cultures. It could be the educative outcomes in different ways. It could be critical inquiry. It could be inclusion. It could be learning about democratic society. It could be influencing your situation. So it could be many more things if we also look at it salutogenically. If we look at ball games, for example, from a pathogenic perspective, ball games are good in PE for students' health. Because most of them run around, so you get a higher oxygen uptake, you will burn calories, and so forth. So you will reduce the risks of diabetes type 2 and so forth, and many other diseases. But ball games can also be used in other ways, of course. Inclusion, democracy, so it's more difficult. And of course, if we take a salutogenic perspective, it's not only good for people's health in many more ways, it's also bad for people's health in many more ways. This is from interviews we did with students, saying that movements is not something for me, my body is all wrong, I'm clumsy, I'm fat, I'm always left out. Well, in relation to ball games, that could be answers in PE. And then ball games are not good for their health in a salutogenic perspective. So it's bad for their health in many more ways because they're left out. They feel stigmatized or anything like that. And in relation to PE, I've seen in some countries, I would say that the best health recipe for some kids would be to stay out of PE. Don't go there. But that's only if you take a salutogenic perspective of health. From a pathogenic perspective, we need to have them there in order to do certain things. So for me, it's more like, in a salutogenic perspective, we have to focus more on how we teach than what we teach. Or also how and what. So it's about the pedagogy of health in PE that is important. How do we relate to our students? And of course, as colleagues in our field said, must be 30 years ago now, one of the important missions of PE is do no harm. And if that's the idea of PE, then this shouldn't happen. Because this is doing harm. But the question we could ask, have that in physical education, could be in a salutogenic perspective. How do we use movement, physical activity, and sport to strengthen resources in order for students to live a good life? And some of the definitions you had would fit right into this. And if we ask that question, I think that the relation between PE and health is much more interesting, and it's much more complex. But I think PE would focus more on pedagogy and the education in PE, rather than changing it to only being facilitating physical activity. Questions? Or comments? Or